Good evening, everyone. I'm Joseph Shawless, and I serve as the Allegheny Intermediate Unit's General Counsel and Legislative Liaison. Welcome to the AIU Central Office. We're pleased to again host this annual event in a hybrid format this year. About 200 members of the public registered to attend in person or online. Interestingly enough, more in person this year, which was not the case last year, as we return to a partly in-person format following COVID. Our audience includes school board members, superintendents and administrators, educators, parents, and education advocates. All state legislators representing the 42 AIU member school districts were invited to join tonight's panel. We have 5 here at this moment, and we're hoping for a few more. They represent both parties and both chambers of the legislature. We're happy to have at least 2 of our senators here, including the Senate Minority Leader, and hopefully we will have Representative Miller, who's the House Majority Whip now, and who rarely misses one of our legislative forums. There are other obligations that may require some legislators to either join late or leave during the event, so we understand that, and we're grateful they could be here. A few housekeeping matters to review. The restrooms are on the opposite side of the wall opposite the windows. So to get to them, you can either go back out through the doors at the back of the room and then go through the double doors. Kim Enns is at the front desk, and she can help you find the restrooms if you go that way. Otherwise, you can use the door to my right, your left, and make 2 lefts, and you'll see them. Keep in mind that tonight's event is being recorded to share with those who were not able to attend tonight. And even though registration was required, this is a public event and we may have media in attendance. Many questions were submitted in advance by our audience, and they've been shared with the legislators and the moderator. So even if your question isn't asked tonight, the legislators are aware of some of your concerns that we might not be able to address. We are accepting questions for the panel during tonight's discussion. If you're on Zoom, you can use the Q&A button, which is likely at the bottom of your screen. If you're in the room, you can send an email to qa@aiu3.net, which we'll have up on the screen here shortly. If you can't send an email from your phone or would prefer not to, you can raise your hand and we can bring you an index card and a pen for you to submit your question that way. If you would like your name and your affiliation and role to be shared as part of your question, please note that when you submit it. Again, unfortunately, we don't expect to have time to address all of the questions. I did want to recognize some of the people who've helped to bring tonight's event to fruition. From our marketing and communication department, Sarah McLuhan and Sarah Campbell have done a great deal of planning and execution. From our technology services department, Jana Baxter is running the Zoom room for us. From our facilities department, Gary Dixon and Romero Howard have made sure the room and our other facilities are ready for you. Kim Enns is working the front desk, as I mentioned, and Pat Sands was at the registration table and coordinated our food, which is provided by Steele Center for Career and Technical Education and was prepared by the culinary students and the pastry students there. So we're grateful for that. I also want to thank our Superintendent's Advisory Council Legislative Advocacy Committee, led by Dr. Amy Birch of the Brentwood Borough School District and Dr. Janelle Logue-Belden of the Deer Lake School District. They assisted us with formulating some of tonight's questions. At this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator back for yet another year. That's John Delano. He's the Money and Politics editor at KDKA-TV. He's an award-winning journalist and a respected public commentator, a lawyer by training who previously worked in the United States Congress for 14 years. During his tenure as a journalist for the last couple of decades, John has interviewed a variety of nationally known political figures, including many of our presidents. I'll now turn the program over to Mr. Delano to lead the panel discussion, and following the discussion, our Executive Director, Dr. Bob Shearer, will have a few closing comments. Thank you again for coming tonight, everyone, and we hope you enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening, everybody. You can do better. Good evening, everybody. It's a great night. It's a great night to be here. It's a great night to be with these distinguished lawmakers. It's really an opportunity to address one of the most critical issues in Pennsylvania, which is our educational system in all its complicated and varieties and questions and problems. And we're going to try to get to many of them in the next hour or so. It's always a privilege for me to moderate this program. I was saying to Senator Costa, who never misses, by the way, we've been here at least a decade or so, if not longer. And many of the same issues come up every year. And yet nothing happens in Harrisburg. You raise the issues over and over and over again. And we're going to raise them again tonight, and maybe something will be different. We do have some new lawmakers with us. We have a new governor. Maybe there's now a bipartisan legislature, the Democratic House and the Republican Senate. Maybe something might be different so that when we come back next year, we can say something happened in Harrisburg. We'll find out. So I'm really honored to be here with these great distinguished individuals. I've had the pleasure of knowing even our newest members. And it's going to be, I think, fun to hear what all of them have to say on a number of issues. Let me remind everybody that if you're into Twitter, are you into Twitter? Anyone into Twitter? If you're going to tweet about this or take a picture of your favorite lawmaker and tweet about it, it's at Allegheny IU3. At Allegheny IU3. And if you want to throw in at Jon Delano, go right ahead. Leave the H out, it's Jon. So I want to begin with just a general question for each of these lawmakers, and I'm going to ask them to be quick about this, not to spend a whole lot of time, because we're probably going to come back and address the topic. Aside from the budget, the money issue, what do you think and what is your greatest priority when it comes to educational issues in Harrisburg this year? Leave the budget issues out. We will address those. But aside from that, what do you see as the most significant educational issues that you would like to see tackled in Harrisburg this year? And I guess I'll go in order of seniority and start with Senator Costa. Jay?
Well, thank you very much, John, and thank you for an opportunity to be here again this year. I've always enjoyed these discussions, and as my new colleagues will find out, it's very informative, and we get to understand what the important issues are to all of you. So John said be quick, so I'll be quick. I would say that, to me, it's probably ties to the budget in some way, but at the end of the day, it's the school environment. By that I mean the environment that the students are learning in are safe schools in the sense that they are environmentally safe for our students to participate in. I don't want to call them toxic schools, but I would tell you that there are school buildings across Pennsylvania that desperately need help and need resources to address that. The second thing is related to that is the issue regarding mental health in our schools, and we've taken steps to address that, and certainly school safety as well. So I would put those three things as priorities that I think we should be addressing. We did begin to address two of the three last year, and we're going to do that again this year. But I think the one with respect to the school building is an issue that we need to maybe do some more work in as we go forward. I know there's a couple other ones that Senator Williams is going to talk to you about. That's a big issue for her. I'll let her do that next.
Well, no surprise, Jay. Each of those three issues are on the lists of questions that have been submitted by school directors and school officials here with us tonight. And I think I asked for one, but of course, I'll take three from you. Senator Williams.
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. And okay, I'll stick with one. I could be here all day. My number one is universal school meals for all kids. So universal school breakfast that we were able to get this last year, extending it for next year. It was in the governor's proposal for universal breakfast and removing the reduced lunch to making it just all free, which is a great first step, but I'm going to keep fighting that we have universal school meals.
Well, Lindsay, I hope you're not surprised that I have your press release on that subject. right here in front of me. So of course it's on my list to ask you about, so thank you. Representative Rob McCurry, nice to see you, welcome. Your
John.
priority for legislative, aside from the budget, for educational issues this year.
Yeah, so I'll just do a brief introduction. Hello to everybody. Thanks for being here. Thanks for what you all do on those school boards as well on a volunteer basis. And just so everybody knows, I've got 4 school districts in the northern part of Allegheny County: Pine Richland, North Allegheny, which I share with Dr. Venkat, Deer Lakes, which I share with Mandy Steele, and then Hampton as well. So in terms of answering your question, John, I would love to see innovation in our schools. And what I mean by that is new ideas, new ways, new methods, new tools that are available but haven't yet been fully implemented in our schools. And I think we have a real opportunity in this moment, and we probably will be talking about it in great length tonight, but the Judge Jubileer decision really creates an environment where we must remake our education environment. And so I would love us to be innovative about rebuilding and changing things so that every student every day can come in and learn and grow and then go on to a great life.
Well, again, no surprise, Rob, a thorough and efficient education, I believe our Constitution dictates. So we'll come back and we are going to talk a lot about that, and that is an opportunity to talk about innovation. So, State Representative Arvind Venkat, Dr. Venkat, I believe the only physician in the State House right now, is that right? It may be for,
It's been 60 years.
I think
so
you
I'm
told me
either
that. It's been
crazy or something.
1960s, the last time we had a physician there. So, Representative Venkat, what is your thought in terms of, I know you're brand new to the legislature, congratulations. Any thoughts?
So good evening, everybody. My name is Arvind Venkat. I represent the 30th District in the North Hills of Pittsburgh. The 3 school districts that I represent are the Avonworth School District, and then I also share the Hampton and North Allegheny School Districts with Representative Mercuri. I would identify 2 priorities. One is educational loss coming out of COVID. We know that virtual education had serious limitations for our students. I think that evidence is very clear. And we, as a legislature, need to make sure, and it is budget related, that schools have the tools they need to make sure that our students can make up that educational loss that we saw out of COVID. The second piece is, and I think it's related to innovation, but it's perhaps a little bit different, is exposing our students to educational opportunities that are not necessarily on the traditional high school, college, graduate school path. We know the workforce needs in this region. We know that our students need to succeed in whatever career path they go forward. And so I think that it's very important in our educational pathways that we foster those opportunities that may not be high school, college, graduate school, but maybe high school, vocational school related, apprenticeship related, and other career pathways. So I think those are the 2 that I would identify.
Great. Thank you, Arvind. Appreciate that. Well, certainly, she may be last, but certainly not least, is Representative Abigail Salisbury. I am very impressed with this woman's background, maybe because I'm the son of both a teacher and a township official. And Abigail, you've served on the Borough Council in Swissvale. You're bringing local government experience to Harrisburg, and that is always needed. And so congratulations, one of our newest members. Congratulations on your recent election and a special election. And let me ask you, from your perspective, you've got, I think, well, I know you must have more than one school district. It's not just Woodland Hills, right?
Yeah, I have Woodland Hills, I have Wilkinsburg, and then I also have the very edge of Pittsburgh in Point Breeze and Homewood, so I have PPS as well.
Awesome. So what do you think is the most important critical education issue that you'd like to see addressed, aside from the money and budget stuff?
I've been in budget hearings all week, so I'll try to put that aside.
Yes, in fact, let's just say this right now. Representative Salisbury is on the Appropriations Committee of the House. That's a very important committee, particularly at this time of year, as budgets are being drafted. And So I know I'm taking you away from your wheelhouse, but you also care about educational issues, and that will come up in the budget.
This has been Education Budget Week.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
good.
So for me, I would say that the top concern that I have that's not money related, although everything costs money, but is safety of the students. So not only their physical safety, but their feeling of emotional and mental well-being and feeling safe. What I mean by that, I'll give an illustration today. So earlier today, several dozen Woodland Hills students got on a bus at about, what I understand, 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and rode buses to Harrisburg in order to participate in a advocacy event about the gun violence that they're experiencing both in their schools and in their communities and homes. And Dr. Castagna, who's the superintendent of Woodland Hills, also came along and testified at a policy hearing in front of the Judiciary Committee about that. And so I attended those events. I was fortunate to be able to meet with those students. And when I spoke with them, one of the questions they asked me is, were you an advocate in high school? Like, were you an advocate in school? And I said, we didn't have to be. When I was in high school, Columbine happened. I graduated from high school in 2000. So Columbine happened, and it was the first thing like that anybody could remember. But nowadays, it seems like there's one every week. There's some kind of something every week. And if it's not in school, it's on the way to school, outside of school, going home from school, in someone's home, and then they have to go to school and deal with the trauma of that and pretend that doing their math homework is the most important thing in their life. So I know what it's like to lose a family member when you're in school. It happened to me, and not to gun violence, but other reasons. And it's hard to focus on your math homework if that's all that you can focus on, or if you're afraid for your personal safety. So seeing all those students today in Harrisburg really put that in the forefront of my mind, is student safety.
That, by the way, is another one of the issues that were raised by school directors and school officials, so we certainly will talk about that. I'm going to ask another general question real quick, and I'll just open it up to whomever would like to address it, and then we'll get into some specifics. I don't have to tell you, Democrats have a majority in the State House by one vote, one individual right now, for the first time in 12 years. Republicans are in control of the state Senate, as the senators know. What educational bills that couldn't pass the House or Senate make it to the floor, and are there particular bills that might actually make it to the governor's desk through the Senate and the House? Anybody have any thoughts about just sort of the environment? Is it more conducive to something happening this year than before? That may be an unfair question to ask the freshman members, but you're certainly welcome to chime in, and anyone else on that.
So, I mean,
Go ahead.
my
Thank you,
naivete,
Arvin.
I'm a new member, but I do think, as Representative Mercuri alluded to, the Jubileer decision is going to require us to look at school funding and look at the funding mechanism.
Right.
And I think that there is, when we talk to school board officials across the state, there is near universal recognition of the issue of the inequities in funding for cyber charters versus brick and mortar schools. With the need to meet the requirements of this judicial ruling, I think we don't have an unlimited number of dollars at the state level to meet the obligations of that judicial decision just with increased state funding. And so I personally think that there's going to need to be a compromise between the House and the Senate on the issue of cyber charter funding and what that means for public school districts.
Okay, good. That's the first mention of cyber, and that comes up all the time, and we will ask more about that. But you think there's some possibilities of success? Senators, is that possible in the Senate?
No, I think exactly what I was going to say is that it's about charter schools. For how many years now we've been talking about, you mentioned earlier, every year we talk about the impact of charter schools, both brick and mortar and cyber, and how they're reining in those costs and the costs that you're all dealing with. So I think this is an opportunity for us to be able to get progress on that issue. In addition to what's going to have to take place with regard to the education funding system as a whole, as we learned from the court case, but specific piece of legislation that I think will be coming will likely be around charter schools.
Any thoughts over here? Rob?
Yeah, I would start. I think everything's on the table this year. I think it has to be. Because of the magnitude of the decision of the Jubileer case, I'll just reiterate, I think it's time for us to rethink public education. There's a lot of good that comes out of public education and our system. There's also a lot of money and resources. About 40% of our budget, tax-paying resources go into public education. Are we getting what we're paying for in terms of our student outcomes? So I think we really need to take a look at that. This is the opportunity for us to do that. And I think it's going to take, I've heard Governor Shapiro say Republicans and Democrats need to get around the table and throw their best ideas out. And I think charter reform is one of those ideas. I know that one thing that we were encouraged by on the Republican side was seeing some interest from Governor Shapiro during the campaign on school choice. And in particular, in the bottom tranches of performing schools, that's where there tends to be some cycles of difficulty and poverty and lower performance. And that if we have a family who wants that student to move out of that school into a different environment, but they can't necessarily afford to move into one of the more expensive areas that have higher performing schools, that's something that really can be life-changing for a student. So we were encouraged by that. So I think having frank dialogue about that possibility is something we're interested in.
Go ahead, Abigail.
I have, again, perhaps naivete, I don't know, but I have
We
one.
love that. If naivete gets us results, it's a good thing.
So one thing that I do hope to see happen is the free breakfast and lunch programs. I would hope that everyone can agree that children should be able to have access to food in order to learn. I think that from being witness to the backpack programs that they put together in Woodland Hills to send home food with kids on the weekends, because otherwise they might only eat at school during the week, I know that there's a very severe need for those types of programs in my community. And, again, just like I said, you can't focus on math if you are experiencing trauma. You can't focus if you are hungry as well.
So if Representative Salisbury gets your bill through the House, Senator, can you get it through the Senate?
I sure hope so. Otherwise, I think we're gonna do some shaming, some public shaming about not feeding kids. At least that's my no holds bars to that one. It's less than 1% of our school budget, of our entire budget, to feed kids. And having a full belly is just like having a book at school. I don't think we should mess around with it anymore. And I think we should lead the way. One thing I think that we, might be able to do is some real meaningful spending in the mental health space. So we've talked a lot about it. We've talked a lot about the mental health crisis for our kids, but we haven't been willing to spend the money, particularly with a divided legislature. So are we funding a school counselor per building? Are we funding more school-based therapists? Are we funding more school nurses? Are we actually funding those positions at a state level? Because I don't necessarily think we need to rethink education. I think everybody in this room knows for a long time has been screaming at the top of their lungs that we have been underfunding and inequitably funding our schools. We know what we need to do to educate our kids, and we just haven't been doing it. We just need to do it. We've been talking about mental health. Let's just fund it and do it and make sure that every kid has a caring adult in the classroom, and our performance will improve.
We've touched on, again, some of the issues that I want to get into in a little more detail, but let's move right to the constitutional question. Rob, you've mentioned this several times, and I think everyone in this room is familiar with the Jubileer decision, the Commonwealth Court ruling, that our current system, basically, of funding education really is unconstitutional. It's not providing the thorough and efficient, quote unquote, thorough and efficient system of public education that all children, regardless of the communities they live in, are entitled to. Instead, we have a system where if you live in a community like mine, or Mount Lebanon, Upper St. Clair, communities like up in North Allegheny, communities that have a tax base and people who can afford to pay higher property taxes end up with schools that are far superior to those who are in poorer areas and economically challenged areas. And a child in Pennsylvania should get the same education whether they live in Upper St. Clair or Mount Lebanon or McCandless or in Duquesne, Clarendon, any of the other communities that we might name. So my question basically is, in your mind, in your view, lawmakers, what exactly is a thorough and an efficient system of public education, and how would you fund it? Those are the critical questions that the governor says you've got to resolve this year, and he will present it, presumably if he agrees with it, to the legislature in his next budget speech. But what exactly are we talking about? What is that thorough and efficient system of public education, and how would you pay for it? And I realize this could be an hour-long topic, and we have lots of other subjects, so I'm going to limit you to 60 seconds, which is ridiculous. But just take a minute and give us sort of the broad strokes. Anybody? Jay, of
I'll
course.
make an effort. Having been around the longest of all these folks here, it's hard to define exactly what that is.
I'm tempted to say you could add up the tenure of all the others and still not exceed Senator Costa.
Well, any event, yes, I've been around a long time. Longevity is not a bad thing, let me put it that way. I would say it's just difficult to say exactly what that is in a sentence or two, but to me, it looks like, when I look at the district of Wilkinsburg that I've been representing for a number of years now, Wilkinsburg is certainly not what it doesn't meet that criteria. What we had to do with the students from Wilkinsburg is work to move them over into the Westinghouse High School, take those kids and move them to that community because they were not enjoying any of the benefits that even the Pittsburgh kids were enjoying. Extracurricular activities, having school nurses in the building on a regular basis, the activities that the school was participating in, the curriculum in terms of having sufficient staff to be able to support them. All those things were a part of that conversation that, all those things need to be part of it, I guess. A strong curriculum, strong teachers who are teaching those curriculums, opportunity for kids to be themselves and to be creative and to be participating in other types of activities, a safe building, an environmentally safe building, a building that's safe in the community, being able to know that you could be part of your community, opportunities in the community for the students in a variety of ways. I mean, those are all some of the things that I think, John, when I think of this type of education system is what we need to be.
So what you would envision would be, it wouldn't matter where you live, the quality of education would be the same throughout
It needs to be
Pennsylvania.
the same all across the Commonwealth as best we can. I don't know whether we'll ever be able to achieve that because some communities are always going to have more than other communities.
Sure.
And I think at the end of the day, though, but the educational component of it needs to be as close to being the same all across. And every kid needs to have the opportunity to be able to get the level of education, the same level of education, regardless of where your zip code is. And I think that's, but it's hard to,
Right. Now,
based upon the community you're in, sometimes it's hard to be able to achieve that.
one way of doing that, of course, is to fund education 100% from the state, which is what some states do. And that way you can achieve an equality of revenue in Wilkinsburg as you might in McCandless. The question of how you make that happen, Senator Williams, might you have a thought?
And it's also, you have to look at the communities you're in too. When you have historic redlining and you have a district that is poor, they are coming with so much more in their backpack when they come to school. So equality is not equity, and it's not, people aren't starting off at the same place. So if you just blanket, everybody gets the same dollars, it's gonna go farther in a place like North Allegheny than it's gonna go in Pittsburgh Public. So that's why this is so complicated. It's not just one easy solution, otherwise we would have fixed it. It's a combination of a lot of things. It's a combination of a fair funding formula. It's a combination of addressing that we have EITC and vouchers, taking money out of public schools and sending it to private schools, that we have a charter school system that is inequitably funded, both brick and mortar and cyber and special education. The fact that every special education charter school kid gets tier 3 even though they're a tier 1 student. So it's like looking at all these pieces together to get to an equity lens.
Rob, do you have any thoughts? You come from a more affluent part of our county.
I come from a mixed area. Yes, John. So we have affluent and we have rural now. So my district is multifaceted. Affluent, on the Pine and Marshall sides and Bradford Woods, and then we've got middle class in Richland and Hampton, and then we've got rural over in West Deer.
Yeah.
So I think if we can figure it out across those three kind of different socioeconomic geographies, that would work for all 4 of my school districts and the dozens across Allegheny County. For me, I think, to answer your question, John, I wrote down a couple things that I've been thinking about that, the efficient and thorough constitutional standard mean to me. And as I think about it, and I'm a dad of 3 kids, and so we, and all you parents out there, everybody wants the best for their student, right? The system we have today allows many parents, but not all parents, to achieve that outcome, that they want the best education for their student. And so I think that's at the essence of what this Jubilee decision is asking us to solve, is let's get from not all are able to provide that best outcome for their students, their kids, but let's get to that every single student, every single day in Allegheny County can get to that outcome, that what their parents want for that student is what they can achieve. And when we do that, I think we have a system, it's widely accessible to all. It is accountable to defined standards of academic achievement, and it is responsive to community needs. I think those 3 things are important as we think about how we proceed. A thought for everybody, so there's this system out there called Khan Academy that came along a few years ago. It was a gentleman named Sal Khan, who was a world-class instructor. He actually, I think, was a financial advisor of some sort. And he was tutoring one of his nieces, and he was so good at it that his family was like, holy cow, you need to change your profession and go into this. And so he did. He created a web portal where the vision for it was a free world-class education for all students. And that exists today. And even some of our public schools are using Khan Academy. And what it does is it takes every student on an individualized path through a defined set of standards. And they've got this world-class instructor who takes them on that journey, and they can rewind the tape, and they can watch it, rewind the tape again, and watch it again. And then what they use it for in class is as a method to ask their teacher for help or to follow up on a topic that they didn't quite get. And then what it gets them is a nice foundation of learned skills that they can use to take with them as they graduate and move on in life. So to me, I think when you're going to a school where you're in rows and columns, like we've been since the 1950s, and we're using chalkboards, and every teacher has to come up with a lesson plan and deliver their own version of it to 30 students, we're missing an opportunity to take something that is standardized and provide it to each student on an individualized basis. And I know there's challenges for us to get to that place where every student has their own individualized path, but I know we can do it because when you have a student who is either on an IEP or an AIEP or a GIEP, whatever they call them, on either ends of the spectrum, the gifted and the needs-based, you get that individualized attention. But then if you're the 90% or 95% that doesn't have that individualized, you're just kind of tranched together. And
Yeah. I want to ask about the funding side of this.
Sure.
Because that's really part of the question. And I think if we're going to provide a thorough and efficient education and the very models that you along those lines, I think the question is whether we have 100% funding by the state so that we remove the inequities of property taxes, the difference between North Allegheny, for example, and Woodland Hills. Would that be, I mean, how do you see the funding side of this in terms of a compromise of some sort?
And Dan Miller just walked in, so maybe he'd like to take that one.
We'll get Dan into this
kidding.
in a minute, but give him a break for a second.
No, the money
Catch up
question,
with
the money question is the elephant in the room. It's
Right.
it's the big deal question, right? So if you live, and it's so interconnected to everything else we do, and even without weighing in on it, just to describe the scope of the problem. So you have most of many districts funding. Not all districts are funded primarily through property taxes, but most Pennsylvania school districts are funded heavily through property taxes, right? So the district you live in, the community that you live in, provides the means for that public school funding. And so, to consider decoupling that has implications that are not just about education, they're also about real estate, they're also about business, they're also about economy. So that's just to describe, the surgery that would be necessary would be that you'd have to somehow, if you're going to fund it all through Harrisburg, you would take away some of the natural incentives that exist for a community that has built a great school, and the school is why folks move into that town. So, how we do that, it may take a while.
Yeah.
In order for folks to get used to that.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. These are very complex issues, and the question, people move to certain communities because of the school districts. And if you take away that inequity, what does that mean for a whole lot of other things? So thank you, Rob. Appreciate that. I will acknowledge State Representative Dan Miller, who never misses this. He's a little late tonight. Well, he's here. And Representative Miller is now the Democratic whip in the State House, which means he's the third ranking? Is that what we call you? Whatever. He's in the leadership of the State House of Representatives on behalf of the Democratic Party. So it's always good to, and I will note that Dan Miller is my state representative, so he gets way too much of me. One way or the other, I'll call him on constituent complaints, just like the rest of you do with school board members. And I know how awful that can be. So thank you, Dan, for being here.
John,
Arvin, let me
John,
go.
before we move on, I just wanted, it's Joe in the back.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
All right, where's that voice?
Disembodied voice.
Oh,
I just
there he
wanted
is.
to remind everyone, since the email address is kind of cut off on our screen up there,
Oh, yeah.
the address to submit questions is qa@aiu3.net, or you can raise and kind of wave your hand, and we'll bring you an index card and a pen. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. That voice from above. Arvin Venkat, your thoughts on the constitutional question?
So I think that there are a few very difficult truths that we need to think about in this room and beyond. The first is, I completely agree with Senator Williams. The inequities in funding as a result of state government policy have to be stopped and reversed. I think that there is no question about that. The court has mandated that. Funding is absolutely a necessity in terms of the thorough and high-quality education that our Constitution requires. However, funding is a necessity. It is not sufficient. I'm an emergency physician, and I know that 80% of the health of my patients has nothing to do with what I do in the emergency department or in the four walls of the hospital where I work, in addition to being a state legislator. It is housing, it is environmental quality, it is family environment, it is economics, many of which state government can influence, but state government is not going to be able to control and make equitable. So to me, when we're looking at this court case, yes, we need to make up the difference that the state government has not met on its obligation on public education funding. It needs to at least be a 50-50 split, and we know that's not the case. So I think that is a necessary first step, but it's not going to solve the problem. And we have to be talking about policies that go well beyond schooling, to again go to Senator Williams' point about the legacy that we carry in terms of redlining and other issues, to talk about what other state policies we need to be talking about. The last point I'll make is, and this is just a political reality, I represent one of the most affluent state house districts in the state. I got the statistics today. The median income in my district is over $100,000. That's saying something. And politically, if you're talking to me, if you're talking to legislators similarly situated, where the school funding issue is challenging, but not the crisis that it is in other districts, the parents, the voters are going to say to me, I want to help other districts, but I don't want to do it at the expense of my kids' education. And so what are you going to do about that? And so when we're talking about this issue, we have to be very frank that when it comes to winners and losers in terms of dollars, that is going to be a real problem in state government unless we're willing to look at, are there alternative revenue sources? And I'll add, property taxes, for all its inequity, at least where I represent, most people aren't thinking about their property taxes because they're making a mortgage payment every month and it's just hidden within their mortgage payment. They make their mortgage payment every month, they're doing it for 30 years. The people I hear about property taxes from are people who are much older, have paid off their mortgage, don't have their kids in school, and are saying, now I see my property tax bill and I didn't see it before. Or the people who are moving into the district and say, why all of a sudden do I have this reassessment, this moving in tax that I didn't know about? And so any alternative funding source, I don't care whether it's income tax, sales tax, marijuana, you name it, is going to be far more visible. And we as political figures are going to hear it much more than what we do now. I don't have a good answer for you. I wish I had a perfect answer for you. But unless we are taking into account the political realities of what we're facing, in addition to that funding is a necessity but not sufficient, all of these answers are only partial credit. They're not the full credit that I think as educators you would want out of us in looking at this issue.
I think that was a good analysis of why this is so complicated and why I personally have my doubts that you're going to solve it in 12 months. But Representative Salisbury.
Sure. So you mentioned the standard of thorough and efficient. Yes. So I want to talk about thorough. I'm troubled by the fact that some people want to curtail the thoroughness of what students are exposed to. I'm troubled by the fact that some people don't want them to have access to certain books. I'm troubled by the fact that people want to pretend everybody was just best friends all throughout history. I want our students to have a thorough education, and that means exposing them to reality of what actually happened, whether it was ugly or not. I won't speak for other groups of people, I'll speak for myself. So I'm a Jew. I wouldn't want a child to learn that some guy named Hitler put a bunch of people in camps for reasons, and then everything was fine. You know, some of the examples of these sanitized curriculums that I've seen come out are jarring and unsettling and terrifying to me, frankly. I don't want to see banned book lists unless it makes kids want to go and read those books more because they were banned and they want to see what's in them. That's so scary. So to me, that's part of what I look at when I look at the word thorough. In terms of how we pay for education, your educational quality should not be held as a lottery based on where your parents decided to buy or rent a house, or whether you happen to live in a homeless shelter, for instance. Who knows? So you should be able to have access to the same level of education no matter where your family can afford to live or stay. So to me, that means redistributing it at a state level. We have, in my district, we have a bit of a issue coming along about gentrification. And so we have fairly high property taxes at the borough level and at the school district level. So eventually it forces people out. And they don't get to live there anymore. And we've seen that in other communities in the area, and I don't want to be part of contributing to it. So I want people to have access to that thorough education, and I want them to have access to the money to pay for it without it being a lottery based on where your parents' address is.
Thank you, Representative Salisbury. Your comments, Abigail, about thorough, I think ring true with a lot of people. And it was actually one of the questions that I was going to ask and maybe before I get to Representative Miller, because we've seen what's happening in Florida, I think it's also happened in Oklahoma, I think maybe in Texas, there are other states where one party controls the whole apparatus of government. We are seeing the state legislature and the governors in these states dictate to school boards what they can and cannot do, to parents what they can and cannot do. Does anybody think that's possible in Pennsylvania, given the structure of our state house and state senate, with respect to whether it's teaching certain, not teaching AP African American history or definitions of critical race theory or the 1619 Project or any of that stuff? Do we think the legislature is going to successfully pass something in this arena, or is this really off the table for this year at least? Anybody?
Hopefully, it's off the table, but I will say that, last session in the Senate, we ran a ban on trans girls playing sports, a book ban, and a Don't Say Gay bill that was worse than Florida's bill, all in the same day. And that has an impact on students. They are watching, they are paying attention, and if you want to talk about mental health crisis of our kids, they see that, and they see that attack whether or not it makes it to the governor's desk or not.
Mm-hmm.
It's
So it could happen again in the state senate?
absolutely. Many of those bills have been reintroduced.
Senator
If I
Costa?
could, I think the effort will be made. I don't believe that the composition of this
Yes.
General Assembly with this governor will allow it to happen, just like Governor Wolf did not let it happen as well. At the end of the day, I would tell you that there's going to be an effort. In fact, today I did an interview with an ABC station in Harrisburg about Mastriano's legislation that's trying to put everything online, so all the curriculum, all the tie to the educational standards, all the coursework that you're going to be doing as teachers, all needs to be online. And there's already opportunities now for folks to receive that. The point I'm making is they're going to make every effort to continue to divide people. And that's just my belief, at least on our side of the building, you'll see that happen. I don't think they'll be successful, though.
Dr.
Yeah,
Venkat?
I think the composition of the state house means that anything that comes over like that from the state senate won't get a hearing, won't get a vote, won't happen. So I think unlike under the Wolf administration where it would make it to the governor's desk, I don't think it even makes it to the governor's desk under these circumstances. I think similarly, though, if local school boards start to make these moves, it will be very, very challenging for the state legislature to pass legislation that would rectify that, to build on Representative Salisbury's point. I don't see that happening. I don't see the state senate reversing those type of decisions as much as I personally would find them abhorrent. I don't see us legislatively being able to fix that. So it is a very delicate balance in terms of what we can and can't do.
Okay, do any of you want to, well, you've already commented, Representative, go ahead.
Yeah, I would be happy to comment. I think the issues that are, very social in nature are very touchy, and they are very local, too. And so while, we want to say we don't want to ban statewide, I think we have to be careful that if we don't allow local school boards to have those discussions about what's appropriate
Sure.
for their school district, and there are certain standards that I think we all can agree from a content standpoint should be statewide, and that's why we've got the Pennsylvania Department of Education to weigh those topics and to bring a very well-informed group to bear on those topics, and where necessary to defer to the local school board. And I know that, when parents are involved, those schools are often healthier and usually higher performing, and that education has a way of as you learn more, your mind opens, and that's the beauty of education. So, I think the parents that call my office and talk to me about content are often talking about age-appropriate levels. And so, when it's politically charged sometimes to hear about a book ban, but I think when we're talking about sensitive topics at the kindergarten, first grade, second grade level, to me, it's understandable when a parent might say, I'd like to have that conversation at home with my student rather than brokered in a classroom. And I think we can find common ground there. I think the emotional reaction of these topics can often, relegate it to the political extremes of the parties. But I think it's better if we try to keep a level head and say, well, what's your goal really? And I think most people would say, well, it's to educate my child, to make sure they're well informed, but also for it to be parent directed. And I think that is a basic human right.
Yeah. No, I think it's one thing for a parent to decide with respect to their own children. It's another thing for parents to decide for everyone else's kids. And I think that's a huge difference. Did you want?
I agree, and I would argue that book bans, Don't Say Gay, actually take away local control. So when you look at a book ban that says you can't have these books, you can't talk about these topics, and take it out of the control of a local school librarian who has went through an entire process to pick out and cultivate a collection within their school that all kids can feel safe and all kids can find books that reflect them, that look like them, that maybe expose them to a new world. That is important. That is actually taking away local control from our educators when you're talking about statewide book bans and statewide Don't Say Gay.
We sort of got off track here, but that's okay, because this is good stuff and a great discussion. Thank you all. I don't want to leave Representative Miller out of the broader question of the constitutional case, the Commonwealth Court case that basically ruled our school system is not living up to the constitutional standard of thorough and efficient. And what I asked your colleagues here was for a very brief definition of thorough and efficient from your perspective. And perhaps more importantly, you've already heard some of the answers. How do you fund such a system? Does it mean that education, public education, needs to be funded 100%, at least up to that thorough and efficient level by state government? Do you have any thoughts, David?
Yeah. So thank you, and it's good to see my friends here from the Senate and from the House, Rob as well. I always appreciate. Yeah, look, I guess first, the state, at the end of the day, of course, it's a state responsibility to be sure it exists. That's what the whole point of the lawsuit was, right? So unlike the federal government, it's in our state constitution explicitly. It's there for a reason. It's why the case won, and it's why for a bunch of us, we said also the sky is blue, because we all knew it wasn't working right. Why do you think Level Up existed? Why did we do the redoing of the basic education funding, the special education funding? In reality, the whole debate had been is how quickly do we correct the problem that we all knew existed? So the sky was blue, and that's what we figured out, and hopefully that's what we will address. So at the end of the day, look, it's a partnership. All education is a partnership. So it's a partnership between the local, the AIU and the state, and the Fed, a very small, too small in some ways, role. There's no doubt about it. So on the good side is we've seen bipartisan push, thanks to in the Wolf administration time period, for large investment. I still think you're seeing an effort from Governor Shapiro. His direction in K through 12 is pretty clear as well. So hopefully we're going to find more progress in that. But we also need to go at the root of the problems of where the discrepancies lie. And I think to some degree we all have lived and accepted some degree of inequity that exists in school districts. The problem is that these inequities that we have accepted they're not road bumps or potholes. They are caverns of opportunity that exist in our state, to the point where it undermines, and it's what the court basically said, is it undermines the constitutional right of our kids. And so we need that. It needs to be a priority, needs to be a shared priority. It's going to take some changes, there's no doubt about it. As to the definition, look, I think the challenge that comes up with it is that we need to have kids who are graduating ready for their next step in life, and not just a percentage of the kids, all the kids. And that's just not what we're seeing. It's not the reality in so many of our areas. And so the basic at the end of the day is a child ready for their next step in life? Right. And that's just where we're falling short.
Do you believe in 100% funding?
For who? From who?
from the state in order to bring all school districts up to a
Listen,
basic
at the
level.
end of the day, and I'm not quite sure how you're using the term, but at the end of the day, it is the state's requirement to meet. So we are the ones who are supposed to be making sure that occurs, one way or the other. So the state has a couple ways that we've structured it, but if a township cannot meet those requirements, then the state most assuredly has to.
Thank you, Dan. You know, this is the first time in a number of years, in terms of the questions that have come in from all of you, both online and through comments, that it's the first time that charter school reform is not number one. We've touched on it, and we may touch on it again, but this year, the topic that seems to have come up a lot is the question of school personnel shortage. Yes? I mean, and we're getting questions really about what is the progress on loan forgiveness for those who are serving in early childhood professions? What's being done to increase salaries? Not just teachers, teachers' assistants, paraprofessionals, I saw bus drivers and the like. What are we doing about this? And related to recruitment and retention is also the question of diversity. What are we doing to attract African American, Hispanic, other minority teachers, as well as personnel throughout the ranks? The diversity is poor. Again, all related to teacher shortage. Substitute teaching. Do we pay our substitute teachers what they should be paid? They should be paid like a teacher. They are teachers, even if they're only there for a week or something. So the question of that kind of a shortage, staffing shortages, are there any incentives being offered? The governor has proposed this tax credit, but only for new teachers getting certified this year, not for those who are in the field who may be looking elsewhere because they're not being paid right. So this whole question of school employees and how we retain the good teachers and attract more people into the profession. Is there a state legislative answer to this concern, which is, as I say, the number one topic that came up for this 2023 legislative forum? Anybody want to tackle that? Dr. Venkat, go right ahead.
So I would say yes, but
Yes to
I do.
what?
Yes, I do think that there are state initiatives that can make a difference on this, but I think they have to be very carefully crafted. I support the governor's initiative, but I think it needs to be tied to actual practice, not to licensure or certification, because individuals who are licensed or certified are not necessarily teaching in the classroom, being a nurse at the bedside, being a police officer on the beat. And so I think for my legislative colleagues up here, I brought this up and I will bring it up again, that proposal needs to be refined, absolutely.
So the teacher actually has to be in the classroom.
It has to be in the
in
classroom.
order to qualify.
I think that that's something where the school districts and the schools can participate in that attestation that would qualify for those type of tax incentives, loan forgiveness, whatever the case may be.
Would you favor expanding that to teachers' assistants, paraprofessionals, early childhood? I mean,
I would, and I think you can if you tie it to actual practice as opposed to certification or licensure, because you don't have the leakage that you have when you just tie it to the piece of paper that qualifies someone who isn't necessarily doing the work. So that's
Gotcha.
the first piece. The second piece is I think we have to stop our war on teachers. I think we saw this in COVID. We saw this to this day, this demonization of teachers is going to, we're seeing the consequences of this. You are telling people don't go into a career as a teacher, don't stay as a teacher, don't retire as a teacher, because you are going to be attacked in every direction. And so I think the rhetoric that we use as legislators, that political leaders use, that school board members use, that gets portrayed is very much a part of this. That may not be a legislative piece, but it is absolutely a public leadership piece. And then the last piece, when you talk about diversity, I take this very personally because I am unique in the General Assembly, being the only physician, but also being the first Indian American in the State House. And it's just an example of the diversity in Allegheny County. And we know that Pennsylvania does not have a growing population. And we know specifically Western Pennsylvania does not have a growing population. So I think we need to be using our state leadership roles, thinking about how do we make Pennsylvania a welcoming environment for all populations, because we don't do that either rhetorically or in policy. And I think we need to be putting pressure on our federal legislators when it comes to immigration, because the reality is, with the population statistics we have in Pennsylvania and the United States, if we are not far more open on immigration, these shortages, economic and otherwise, will only get worse and worse and worse. And so those are the 3 points that I would make.
Excellent. Thank you, Arvin, very much. How about others? Any thoughts, comments on this, Senator Williams?
Add on something else is, we're here talking about like K to 12 space, but we need to look at how we're funding higher education. So we have a drastic decrease in the amount of educators that we are graduating from our PASHE schools and our state relateds. And when you talk about diversifying our teaching force, the studies show that as tuition goes up, minority participation in those programs goes down, and minority participation in higher ed goes down. The way that we address that is funding our higher education better. I mean, Pennsylvania's 49th in the country in terms of how we fund our public higher education system.
49th?
49th, maybe 48th.
Still bad.
And so not only are we underfunding it, then our students, we're number 2 or 3 in terms of our student debt load. So they have so much debt, and so going into a public service job like teaching is, a huge burden. And, and this is one of my criticisms with Governor Shapiro's budget, is that it only proposed a 2% increase across higher ed for our PASHE schools and our state relateds. So if we're talking about growing a teaching force and making higher education more accessible for a group of people, 2% isn't going to cut it. So we have to
Good.
look at that too.
Thank you, Lindsay. Jay, did you want to
Just very briefly, I think also to your question about support aides and the like, and substitute teachers and the like, I think the certification or the regulatory process by which folks can be in those positions, I think, has to change. We have to make it more inviting for folks who may have had a career in a particular subject matter, who would end up being tremendous support staff in an economic class or in some other type of class. Make it easier for us to be able to bring those people into the system without having to go through this long, protracted regulatory process. I think that adds a lot of value to life's experience, lived experience for that person to be able to provide to the students in that classroom, whether it be as a paraprofessional or whether it be as a teacher or whether it just be as somebody who's coming in to support something along those lines.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I've taught graduate students for 25 years at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm not qualified to teach at Mount Lebanon High School. I mean, there ought to be a way. There ought to be a way.
I
Dan.
would note, I think, and I don't know for sure about the new class. I know I was one of the few certified teachers that were in the House anyhow last term. And it's, there were so many good points that came up here with it, but I did have to just mention, look, part of it, the paraprofessional aspect is, some people come up and they say, well, look, it needs to get back, we'll stabilize to something before the pandemic. And I'm like, look, I'm not interested in before the pandemic. February 2020 was not a panacea in so much of education. So while I'm trying to advance us forward, I'm not interested in going back. And the paraprofessionals were paid horribly then. They're still paid bad now. Right. And I'm getting people come up and they said, well, look, I'm paying 13, I'm paying 14, I'm paying 15. It's irrelevant, right? They'd make that money at Target. And then I have administrators who come up and some of them say, well, they're not skilled positions. And that's administrators. And by the way, if that's the administrator's attitude, then that's showing another problem that's embedded in that school. So the crisis in paraprofessionals, while coming to a point now, it didn't start with the pandemic. It predates it, right? And it's obviously comes from the feds not also helping pay special education costs. But in relation to education, we are immensely struggling. And I believe the special education system is flashing red across the board. And it's no matter whether I've seen the problems in the wealthiest districts and the most challenged districts. And that doesn't even touch the staffing in relation to mental health. So in relation to the care that needs to be done and that should be done and that is required to be done, so many districts are struggling, and the state should be coming in to recognize this mass failing and assisting them in making sure that money is available to raise the wage of everybody who's required to provide services for IEPs. Parents should not be asked, and students should not be asked, to hopefully next quarter hang tight and do your best, and maybe I'll be able to comply with your IEP then. That's wrong. It's existing. It's growing. It's a big problem, and it's embarrassing to be part of Pennsylvania's educational landscape.
Thank you, Representative Miller. Rob?
I'll just
Abigail,
chime
do you
in
want
and
to say anything on
agree
this?
with a lot of the points that were made. I think the PASHE system, so the Penn West, the Commonwealth U's, the Slippery Rocks, that line item was a disappointment at 2%. It needs to be higher. I think we should plow a lot more money into that system because that's where our teachers, nurses are coming from. I think the state-related, though, if I'm not wrong, were 7%. So the Pitt, Penn State, Temple, Lincoln.
I thought they were 2.
I think they had a higher rate. So I'd rather see the high end on the PASHE schools. And then I think, the other points are spot on. The only thing I would add, too, is in regards to diversity, that mentorship has a role to play. And I think mentorship, partnerships of professionals who come into the schools, who commit to, showcasing a career. And we do some of this in our schools across Allegheny County, but I think we could formalize this a little bit more and get, our professionals into the schools to show what it's like to work in different fields, inspire people, so that they can see folks like them who are succeeding after high school and college.
Good. Thank you, Rob. Abigail?
So we live in a capitalist society, whether we like that or not, but we do. And we pay for the things that we value. So I hear people talk a lot about how much they value teachers, but we pay for what we value. So do you really value them if you're not paying them very well? I really think that a lot of it stems from teaching being viewed as a women's profession. I think it comes from the pink collar concept, like nursing, or I come from a nonprofit sector background, which is about 85% female, and I see it there too. And people are expected to perform a lot of unpaid emotional labor and a lot of unpaid regular labor because they're female, and you're supposed to, because you're supposed to be nice, and you're supposed to be helpful, and you're supposed to go above and beyond, and you're supposed to be just kind of perfect, aren't you? So, yeah, pay people what they're worth. If you say you value people, then back that up with actual dollars, because you can't eat verbal praise.
Yeah. I'm doing my best to get through a lot. There are a lot of questions, and I'm trying to combine them because there's a limited amount of time. But I want to come back. Actually, this question was raised, or this topic was raised, by one of the, I believe one of the representatives. I want to say Representative Salisbury. How safe are our schools today? Is it an environment that teachers or anybody else want to be in? And we're talking about physical safety as well as the safety of the buildings in which we operate. What can the state do about this? There was a question about the Plan-Com program. I guess the governor's proposed money to remediate environmental hazards, but he didn't put any money into the existing Plan-Com program, which apparently is the vehicle for reimbursing districts for buildings and renovating schools and the like. And there hasn't been a new project since 2016 because, as I understand it, you lawmakers haven't put money in with a governor who's willing to sign it. So we can talk all we want about dilapidated buildings, but what exactly is happening from Harrisburg on that? And couple that with the fact that in some of our school districts, well, we reported on the news. Kids get shot when they walk outside their door, right on school grounds. I mean, that's intolerable. Is there anything that can be done from the state level? Broad-based, I'm wrapping a whole lot of questions into that. So anybody want to take a stab?
Yeah, I will. I mean,
Senator Costa.
we have made a lot of investments in school safety programs. Our colleague who's normally here, Senator Jim Brewster, I've appointed him to the School Safety Committee. For the last 3 years, we've driven out over $100 million to school districts across Pennsylvania.
Right.
For the most part, early on, it was about hardening schools, putting bars on windows, putting, metal detectors and the like. But it's shifted. I think many of you know, probably your applicants, it's shifting more into the social service type programming in terms of the grants that are being requested now. So there was legislation we worked on, and we were able to get it in when we did that program. And we've continued to fund that. We're going to do it again this year. The last 2 years, last year we put $100 million into mental health for our school districts to be able to allow them the opportunity to develop programs along those lines, and we're going to replicate it again this year. We put $100 million to sort of support that in community mental health programming. That hasn't been rolled out yet. We're sort of delayed in being able to get that done, but at the end of the day, to me, it demonstrates an effort to be able to create an environment on the mindset, the safety mindset of a child and the teachers there that we're trying to address. On the environmental nature of our schools, more work needs to be done there. The PlanCon conversation, our colleague, Senator Tim Carney, is leading an effort in Harrisburg to try to reinstitute the PlanCon program. I will tell you why the PlanCon program ended, in my view, and a view of a lot of other folks. A lot of constituents across this Commonwealth saw college campuses in our high schools with gymnasiums and with football fields and a whole bunch of other things that were being built with those resources. There was a lot of criticism of that, and I can tell you, in the years that we got rid of that, it was during the Wolf years. That was one of the big reasons why I think a lot of folks felt that that was the case.
It was the money was being used for athletics as opposed to.
Yes, and as opposed to building classrooms.
Education.
In terms of, that's how people perceived it. Whether it's true or not, it's a whole different matter. But that's what won the day at that point in time, and they felt it was best to pause that program at that point in time. But I would tell you that there's certainly a need as we go forward. We know the crisis that we have in our schools across Pennsylvania, whether it be Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, whoever it might be. We know we have to make investments along those lines. So,
Yep. Representative Miller?
yeah, it's a $4 billion question that Senator Williams just talked to me. Governor's put some money in there. It's a beginning, it's a start, but we know we need to do more. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Jay, very much. Dan?
Yeah, thanks. So PlanCon is a $1 billion broken promise, right? So it is a joke of a program that has passed on to taxpayers and school districts who kept their word and developed a project, like in Mount Lebanon, that was designed with PlanCon going through it, and then the state pulled it out. So, look, I actually said that the program should have been canceled years ago because school districts counted on that money coming from the state when they made their program. So it is a massive, multi-billion-dollar problem that's been passed back. And right now, I do hope it's something that we revisit, but everybody should be concerned. And Jay brings up a lot of good points. There are things we can do to target that money better. There are things we can do to give help to school districts that maybe, if you want to go build the field, if the field is a big problem, you leave the field out. But look, we want fantastic buildings. I want the kids to be in places where they are envisioning tomorrow, right? That's not all the process. A great building doesn't give you everything there, but a good, healthy building that shows you tomorrow is incredibly important. So we want to fund that. That is something the state should be involved in. But billion-dollar broken promises is a massive problem for school districts, and everybody should be disappointed with it. Look, when you bring up safety, Jade did a great job talking about the safety grants that are there, and that's fantastic. Part of the challenge, there are two things I would say with that. Number one is, again, he's right when he brings up the mental health side for it. We have to be talking about that. And we stumbled a little bit out of the gate in relation to some of that now. We have a problem with personnel. I was talking to people at Western Psych. Western Psych, which is the second largest mental health provider in Allegheny County, has reduced its bed by 40. Why? Staffing. So now St. Clair Hospital, which has a mental health component too, has now put 11 or 12 of its beds in the emergency room into rotation, and they're providing mental health services in a hallway. So look, we have a massive problem on that. Again, something that predates us as being too slow to address, and now here when it's a crisis, it's an issue. Look, policing, we kind of leave it to local school districts to decide some of the things. The only thing I would note is if school districts decide to bring police in, the right police officer can do a fantastic amount of work. By the same token, the memo of understanding between the school district and the town must be some that also keeps in mind two key components. That what studies show is school districts who don't put in a good memo of understanding with the police or develop a police force that does it well shows that kids with IEPs make up a disproportionate amount of the kids who get referral to juvenile court, and kids of color make up a disproportionate amount of kids that end up going referral to criminal court. So the problem that comes up is that if police are there, which again, a right police officer could do a fantastic job, what we're seeing is kids with disabilities and kids who aren't white are going to court more than they otherwise should be as far as being representative of the population. Those may not say everything, but they say something, and they need to be addressed when we talk about school safety and how the police interact with teenagers. Last thing I'll say on teenagers with it, by the way, just on a quick point, is Miranda warnings. Studies show that a kid under 17 with a typical, kids under 17 cannot understand what the Miranda warnings are giving them. So how cops generally interact with kids matter, and they should be seriously considered in a strong, protective way when it comes to putting more police into schools.
I should note that Representative Miller is the state legislature's premier expert on mental health issues, and you usually have a dozen bills or so in the works. And by the way, that was one of the topics.
You got to take it over. By the way, he's being very kind. I'll let Dr. Venkit hopefully take over for me on this. But what he's really saying is, the legislature maybe calls me that, and that should scare the hell out of all of you.
I wasn't going to go that way, but you really. We do have a lot of, questions have been raised about mental health. So Dan, let me just ask you real quick, because I'll wrap this into one quick question. Is there discussion of mandating more mental health support in our schools in this current budget or in this legislature?
There is a fantastic discussions going on, but I'm going to punt to the chairwoman of the Senate.
Okay.
Because I think Lindsay would give you a good update.
Well, if it gets through the Senate, it'll get through the House.
I think you need to hear from Lindsay. I think Lindsay does.
Senator Williams, the ball has been tossed to you.
Oh, I'm not sure if I know what I was supposed to talk about. Kind of goes back to the beginning of when we were saying, we've been talking about a long time. If it comes out of the House, are we going to pass it in the Senate? Are we going to, mandate school counselor ratios? Are we going to mandate a school therapist in every classroom? Are we going to pay for that at the state level so that every
Yes.
school can do that?
Yes, unfunded mandates, that's
Yes.
another question that came through.
Yeah, that it's so important. We've been talking about those ratios forever, and we have money to do it. We have $5 billion in the rainy day fund, I don't know, how many billion-dollar surplus?
About 7.
$7 billion surplus. And we have a constitutional decision that says you're not properly supporting our kids. And part of that is the mental health supports in the schools. So there is some energy in terms of discussion in the state Senate about it. I hear it all the time on both sides of the aisle. It's, do you want to pay for it?
Yeah, good point. Representative Venkat.
Yeah, I hate to pour cold water on this discussion, but I think that, if funding was the issue, I think we would do it in the next week. I think the issue is the personnel who are qualified to provide these services. I'm an emergency physician. What Representative Miller just described is a regular part of emergency care. Our chief ways that we care for the mentally ill in this country are emergency departments and jails. And so the reality is we do not have the cadre of mental health professionals to meet this promise today. So this is a multi-year, multi-billion-dollar investment that needs to be coupled with exposing our kids to careers as mental health professionals, incentivizing that, making sure the educational system can prepare those individuals, and then bring them into the workforce so that they can then serve the general population, including our kids. So, again, it goes back to an answer I gave before. I think funding is a necessity. It's not sufficient. And so this comes down to what are our priorities. That doesn't mean that I'm saying just throw your hands up and say do nothing. but let's be realistic about what it's going to take to actually get this done, because it is not just a matter of spending the money. I wish it were, but it's not.
And I would be remiss if I didn't give credit to my Republican colleague, Michelle Brooks, who co-sponsored a bill that we got into the budget last session that provided paid internships to school-based mental health professionals, counselors, social workers, nurses, et cetera. And that was a bipartisan effort that got into the budget, you know, funded for 1 year, want to see it for more, but that was something we worked across the aisle. So there is energy there.
Senator Brooks represents a district just north of us, I think part of Butler County is included in her district and goes further north.
John, if I could just add.
Go ahead, yeah,
I
go
think
ahead,
just
Jay.
in this whole worker shortage arena, where we have a lack of professionals prepared to work, has really, I think, is really a big part of what we're talking about as we go forward. I mean, I know our appropriation hearings we've had this week, there's been a lot of talk about that. Whether it's teachers, whether it's nurses, whether it's police officers, whether it's childcare workers. You know, the governor's adding over almost $70 million to childcare, not necessarily to be able to increase the number of slots, but be able to have enough providers in those to be able to teach the kids and to work with the kids in the slots that we have available right now. So there is attention being focused on this thing. Certainly the tax credit program he's talking about is part of that, but there's a real awareness that we have to take steps to be able to address it. We haven't, as Dan mentioned earlier, I think that these are problems that existed prior to 2019, but at the end of the day, they're now being in focus right now, and I think you're going to see a lot of conversation in this space as we go forward over the coming months.
We are coming near the end of our program. We've covered a lot of issues. I want to see if I could come back to one issue that was probably number 2 that we didn't address quite as fully, but I want to just ask, do any of our lawmakers here, I asked initially, because of the divided legislature, were there some possibilities for issues for legislation to get through now that didn't get through in the past? And one of the issues that a number of you mentioned was charter school reform. So let me come back to that, because that's a very important issue to a lot of folks in this room and watching us on Zoom. What do you think is likely to be the kind of charter school reform that makes it through the State House and State Senate to the governor's desk, if any? If any. Senator Williams, I know you chair the committee, so.
Yeah, I authored the charter school reform bill last session, and I'm a little more pessimistic than I'd like to be in terms of whether we get it across the finish line, because there's a lot of pressure coming to do absolutely nothing. Like even, you know, things that were minor in the charter school regs were fought over hard, just enshrining some things, some basic accountability and transparency that we've been doing. So I want to say that we might get some of it, but I'm a little pessimistic, because we have entities like the Commonwealth Foundation that is putting a lot of money into the opposite. They're putting a lot of money into privatizing our schools, and that's a hard hill to climb in the state Senate.
But you are focused on charter schools. And I guess, are there Republican allies? Because the Senate is Republican-controlled.
A few, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, I was talking the Senate. Yeah, Rob may be an ally, who knows, in the House.
One of our biggest allies was Senator Pat Brown, and he's now, you know, the budget secretary. He's no longer in the state Senate, but he was always a good ally on that. So I don't know some of the newer senators, so maybe I'll find some more. Maybe I'll find some different allies.
Well,
maybe I'll
maybe
try not to
things-
be as pessimistic.
Maybe things
John,
will be
if I
different
could-
in the House.
If I could,
Yeah, Rob, go
just
ahead,
to
and then
weigh in,
Mark.
because I think it is about finding allies and building alliances, but I also think it's about creating a grand bargain. That if you're sitting across a table with, you know, sets of interests weighing on both sides and viewpoints all around,
Yeah.
you have to come, this is my view, you have to come ready to negotiate. So what that looks like, you asked what could make it through.
Yes.
I think we have to be creative about that. And I think we have to find ways that all parties would be pleased with the outcome. Because I think what gets lost sometimes in the interest group-based negotiations or discussions or advocacy is the kids and their outcomes. So if we just kind of clear the table, close the door, sit around and say, what can we do? What is doable? Because, Lindsay, you said it well. We've got all the reasons in the world to get this done, including a court case saying our system's unconstitutional. So I think we have to look that squarely in the face, and we have to look at our economic realities in Pennsylvania, where we're declining in population and the system's broken. We're exporting our students because they're graduating and finding other places to go. So it's time to do it. So I think we need to get around the table.
And to be clear, I've been around that table and rolled my sleeves up, and I will continue to be until we get it done. I think there is compromise there, and I'm willing to do it. It's just, I think it's going to be a little
And,
painful.
and listen, I think it's great.
Arvin's next.
Listen, I joke with Rob. Rob is a friend of mine, and I very much appreciate it. I will tell you, if we had a little more Rob, I think we could find some good compromise. So I look forward to seeing those conversations in the House, which obviously we are the majority. It's a slight majority, obviously, but we are interested in where we can go. Look, if I had to pick one, I would start with charter school and special education reform. That seems like low-hanging, common sense, financial thing that can work without a doubt. Look, my only other thing I would note with this here, and I know you're winding down, John, we'll kick it over to the good doctor too and whomever, but look, the challenge I think we have is there has been distractions. I was on the House Education Committee. I fought to get off of it. It was, during my time, largely a waste of time. I did not enjoy it. I thought we were spending time doing ridiculous things. And as one of the only teachers in the House, I was like, thank you, I've had enough of this. And so I'm hopeful that we'll see a renewed effort really on the things that can really help outcomes and reward and appreciate teachers and go through back to where Democrats and Republicans can get big things done for our schools and to find help for school districts. But one of the greatest challenges we have, and was just hinted on, is that whether it's charter to some degree, but privatization to another, there is that influx where I think that coming out of the pandemic, in particular, there's been elements that have been fueled into this discussion, where even righteous frustration from parents have been pushed into camps that I don't even think some of them are aware of who's paying for their mailers. But in relation to, there is an effort, I think, more so than ever before, to privatize public education. I definitely feel it. I think it's a strong undercurrent, and it's something that we have to be cognizant of. Because here's the thing. Public education, our public school system, our traditional public schools, are still the only place that no matter how rich or how poor, the color of your skin or who you worship, how you identify or whether or not you have a disability, that you will be educated in the same building as everyone else. It's the only place where that happens. And there is still the value of bringing that great American diversity together to learn together, to know how to argue together, to know how to academically fight together, to know how to have those debates and then go have lunch together and go to gym together and root for the same teams together. That unifying experience is unique and something that we have to be pushing and strengthening. So I think that part of the problem that we have, and charter schools to some degree get pulled in, is that there is a growing undercurrent of privatization that I think is detrimental to our schools, our public schools, and to our greater success as a state if we don't come to grips with the idea that our sole focus should be on how to lift up every public school system, no matter where you are.
Well, and I would only add, Dan, that cyber schools separate and divide. So, Arvin, you wanted to make a comment.
I was just going to make 2 points. The first is coming to this with fresh eyes, and as someone who was a clinical researcher before I took on this role, it makes no sense to me that we're comparing apples to oranges when it comes to cyber charter, public schools. The standards have to be the same in terms of judging outcomes and the like. It makes no sense. The second thing is, and I think this is just a political reality, and our majority whip is sitting over there, I've been in the room with the Democrats, the Democratic caucus for the House. I do not see any way that there are 102 Democrats who vote for a budget without reform when it comes to charter school in this cycle. I really don't. I think I may be giving Dan a heart attack over there, but I just, just listening to my colleagues, I just don't see how that gets across the finish line, and that it may be a fundamental difference from previous years.
Well, it is the job of the whip to whip all those 102 members on the same vote. I think that's almost as tough as being a school director. Not quite. Yeah. We are running. I know we have maybe a minute or two more before we'll put Dr. Scheer on the spot up here. I was looking through the various questions that we had and to see if there was anything that we had really left out. And the one we touched on, again, one of you mentioned this, I believe, actually it was Dr. Venkat, talked about non-traditional education, vocational, or what others would call technical ed, career and technical ed. Governor Shapiro, and we'll make this the last question, Governor Shapiro has proposed a 16% increase. This is something he seems to care, I know he cares about because I've interviewed him on this topic more than a few times, and he feels very strongly enough that he changed the rules in terms of state employee requirements. You don't have to be a college graduate. That is tending towards the same notion that we ought to be providing alternatives to this traditional form of education. So let me ask, is a 16% increase, to me, it's $24 million. I don't know what I guess we could do the math and figure out what that overall budget is. Is that enough? Do we see more of a focus in our public schools with respect to technical career and technical ed these days? And Lindsay, I know because of your role on the Senate Education Committee, we'll go back to you on this.
I'm never going to turn down additional dollars for career and tech ed. I mean, we have some amazing programs both in Pittsburgh Public, at Beatty Tech in my district, and they're bursting at the seams. Like, they don't have enough space, so whether it be the direct subsidy to the career and tech ed centers, or whether it be for their infrastructure, making sure that they have the equipment so that kids are learning on up-to-date equipment, like, I'll take all the dollars. And I'll also raise him one up. If you're talking about investing in career and tech ed for workforce development, then the 2% to community colleges wasn't enough. Because community colleges are the other piece of our career and tech ed workforce development that is the point of access for many of our kids coming out of Pittsburgh Public or wherever. They're going to CCAC first, and CCAC has been having to struggle with tuition and stuff and putting more burden on students because we haven't increased what is coming at our career or at CCAC. So I'd take more, if it's not in that line item, I would take more in the CCAC and the community college line item for career and tech ed.
Where are we in the State House? Is something going to happen here? Rob, you could.
Well, I'll start, and then Dan, please. But I think if there's a grand bargain, Lindsay, that I see, it's on that topic. It's career and tech, and it's patchy schools. This is where we need to invest and invest heavily in this moment, because going to the University of Pittsburgh or the University of Penn State and majoring in philosophy is no longer, and no offense to any philosophers in the room, I'm sure you're highly employable at what you do, but it's just not a return on investment. And we looked at the numbers. There's a study that was published last year, and you can look at these schools of higher ed, and 40% in some of these schools, on an ROI basis, 40% of the majors do not result in a positive ROI after 20 years. So that's just not sustainable. So I think, Lindsay, you nailed it there. We do need to invest in our career, and it's called career and tech ed because there's a job waiting for you at the end.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you just look at what some of our unions have done in terms of training. I have been blown away by visiting some of these centers where for the college grads, for the high school grads who've come out of these career tech programs, I did a story once where in 5 years you can make $100,000 without a college education.
As a daughter of an operating engineer, near and dear to my heart.
Yes, go ahead, Abigail.
So I'm going to answer this slightly differently. So my normal job is I'm a lawyer. I have a reduced cost law practice for nonprofits and small businesses. So in working with small businesses, I have a number of tradespeople as clients. HVAC, electrical, plumbing, anything you can think of. They are almost universally in their 50s, 60s, 70s. Unless they have a child, usually a son, unless they have a child who wants to take the business over, or there's another entity that wants to buy up a lot of small little businesses in order to kind of corner the market in an area, there's nobody really taking that work on. And when I was in high school in the 90s, I was basically told, you got to go to college or you're going to live in a van down by the river, and that's it. Go get your philosophy degree. Take out six-figure loan to get your philosophy degree. Everything will be fine, we were told. You just need to get some. I literally was told, just get a degree in something. I don't know, maybe that was true in the 70s or something, but it was definitely not true in the aughts when I graduated from college. So I graduated with $93,000 in student loans. So the thing that I think we have made a mistake is we now have this big gap where we don't have people in their 30s and 40s who are ready to take on those businesses or start their own businesses or take those types of jobs. And unless we accelerate that right now with people who are in their teens and 20s, we're just gonna have nobody. And you can't outsource fixing your radiator. I'm from Ohio originally, so I say radiator. I know you're supposed to say rads. I'm very sorry.
No, radiator's fine.
Okay, you'll have to accept that. But I've been corrected on a number of occasions for how I say radiator. But you're not able to outsource those jobs. You can't offshore those jobs of coming and fixing your plumbing. You have to have a person physically come and do those tasks. So those jobs aren't going to go away. And especially with the focus on, electric vehicles and that type of thing, you're only going to have more electrical work coming up. But just from being in my small business practice, there just aren't enough people doing that work.
Well, as Representative Salisbury said a little earlier, we are a capitalist society. And I think if you took a high school student and said, your career in technical ed can lead to $100,000 in 5 years, just go through, or less than that even, if you go through one of the union training programs, that might do it, because you're absolutely right about the age of the people that we get to do things these days. They're all in the 50s. And it's like what's happened to me with all my doctors. They've all retired. They're all retiring on me. Or yeah.
Hey, John.
Go ahead,
The
Dan.
only other thing on that, too, is what we have to keep in mind is that message, which is a strong message and something that we should be talking more about. It has to be equally applied. And what I mean sometimes is, yes, we should be talking career tech. And yes, for example, we have fantastic trades out here that are great opportunities. But that message should be applicable in Mount Lebanon and Upper St. Clair just as much as in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Because all too often, what I keep coming across is that message is more relayed to school districts with a greater minority population than it is to a majority white school district. And that works in so many ways and is negative in almost every context. Those career tech and our trades should be a message that resonates just as loud in every corner. But what I get frustrated with, John, a little bit, is when I go to a couple events and I'm there with friends and they're talking as if my son should not be hearing that message, while my friend who is black should be told that message. It's something that I do bump into often, too often still. But it is a failure. And the last thing I'll say with that too is we are still struggling. And I've been seeing some steam fitters are doing a great job in trying to outreach. But we have to address some of the roadblocks that are stopping minority membership into unions. That includes driver's license reform still. That is an issue. That includes how they pay for the actual, some of the tools and some of the things they need for the apprenticeships. Mm-hmm. So there still are things there. We have a scholarship program that I know in the House that we're going to be talking about. Hopefully there's one in the Senate as well. These bridge opportunity scholarships that when working with our trades can help end that gap. But my only point being with it is it has to be a message that's universally applied. And that college message needs to be in Pittsburgh as much as Mount Lebanon, and the career tech has to be in Mount Lebanon as much as Pittsburgh.
I've abused our time by 3 minutes, but isn't this an outstanding panel of lawmakers? Join me in thanking them. Thank you. It's my great pleasure to call on Dr. Bob Scher to wrap this all up for us. Bob? Executive Director. You don't need an introduction. Everybody knows who this guy is. Thank you, Bob.
I've learned in my life you never cut off John Delano. So if you want to go a few more minutes, you let him go a few more minutes. So, but good evening for those of you that I don't know, and many of you in here I do, and thank you so much for being here this evening. This is something that we have done for many, many years at the Allegheny Intermediate Unit. And each year, it's amazing to get the turnout that we get from the various legislators, the questions that come from those of you that are online, those of you before the event, really do help frame what the issues are in any one given year. And John's right, a lot of times those issues are consistent from year to year. But each year, hopefully we get some new ideas that spark some new conversations from some folks, and maybe there are some things that can be done this year that maybe haven't been done in the past. And so we do know that public education is at a critical juncture. We need to look at the issues and challenges that were discussed this evening as opportunities, and I heard some of that tonight, which was great. How do we find common ground on adequate funding? What are the creative solutions we need to implement the focus on educator recruitment and retention? And then how can we do this in collaboration with our students and our families and our educators and the communities and, of course, our legislative partners? We are an educational community that advocates and advances equitable opportunities for every learner. That's our mission here at the AIU, and I heard a lot of that here this evening, and so I'm excited about that. So I do want to thank all of the legislators that were here this evening and the new legislators, and hopefully this is the first of many opportunities where you get to join us. Please, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know many of you are coming in from Harrisburg, so please, one more time, would you give them a round of applause? And certainly a heartfelt thank you to our moderator, John Delano. You always bring your expertise. And this event is what it is because of your involvement. And just a special shout out to a few other individuals. The Superintendent's Legislative Subcommittee for aligning on the topics for this evening. Joe Shawless for serving as our Legislative Advocacy Lead for the AIU. Sarah McLuhan, Sarah Campbell, and Pat Sands for their event coordination. Jana Baxter for hosting our Zoom room. Thank you, Jana. And also Romero Howard for much of the facility set up in the back. Thank you for that, Romero. And I do have to give a shout out to, we talked so much about CT at the end, and I know Mr. Rice behind me was very excited about that conversation, but Steele Center for Career and Technical Education did provide the food here for this evening. So thank you. And I was told that there was quite a bit of food left, so it's been put in to-go bags. So please, when you leave, make sure you grab something. Arvid, I don't think you've touched your food since you walked in, but and then also thank you to Huey's Event Production Services providing our audiovisual support here this evening. One last announcement, if you could stay up here for just 1 second. I know we like to get a picture with all of the legislators that are available, and we'll do that in just a moment. But thank you to everyone for gathering here with us this evening, whether you're online or here in person. Be safe, be well, and we look forward to seeing you again next year. Thank you.